Hello everyone, it's time for another English lesson. Today we will be covering two topics that are linked to each other, connected, but we will cover them separately. First, we will cover the past simple and present perfect contrast. And secondly, we will cover the present perfect continuous tense. So let's begin. First, we will read the text inspired about our friend Danny here. While I read you the text, try and concentrate on the words that were written in red and try to differentiate or try to recognize which verbs were written in the past simple tense and which were written in the present perfect tense. So Danny McCaskill grew up on a Scottish island, but has lived in Edinburgh since 2006. Thanks to the internet, he has become one of the most famous stunt riders in the world. 3 years ago, he made a video called Mountain Bike Trickster and posted it on YouTube. 3 million people watched it. His most recent video is called Inspired Bicycles. It has already had 500,000 views, and it hasn't been on YouTube for more than a few days. His videos are so successful that Danny has given up his regular job and become a professional mountain biker. Danny has always enjoyed doing stunts. Not surprisingly, he's had a lot of accidents. In fact, he can't ride at the moment because he's just broken his collarbone for the third time in the past 6 months. Now that we have read about Danny's exciting life and career, let's check out our verbs. So the first verb is grew up. This is, of course, in past simple. Danny McCaskill grew up on a Scottish island, but has lived in Edinburgh. Now, has lived, so the verb to live, here is expressed in the present perfect tense. He has lived in Edinburgh since 2006, and this is because of this part, since 2006, we have the information about when Danny McCaskill started living in Edinburgh. So whenever we have an information about the starting point of a certain process or an action, then we will most likely use the present perfect tense. I will elaborate more on this in the later exercises. Thanks to the internet, he has become one of the most famous stunt riders in the world. Now here we don't have a specified starting point, but this is information that is relevant to what we are talking about now. And this is a very important thing about the present perfect tense. It connects the past to the present in a way. It talks about things that either started in the past but are still going on in the present, or about things that happened in the past but are still important to us for what we are talking about in the present. So we are obviously talking about Danny's stunt career, about his life as a stuntman, and the information that we gained from this sentence is important to us. So the information about things that happened in the past sort of shaped his life in the present, and this is why we use the present perfect tense here. 3 years ago, he made a video called Mountain Bike Trickster and posted it on YouTube. These are both in the past simple because, of course, we use past simple for pure facts about things that happened in the past, information, names of certain things. 3 million people watched it, again, past simple. His most recent video is called Inspired Bicycles. It has already had 500,000 views. and it hasn't been on YouTube for more than a few days. So again, information relevant to the present. It is relevant about what we are talking about currently. And also the views are still being counted. So this is still a process that's going on in a way. His videos are so successful that Danny has given up his regular job. Again, important information for the present. So we use present perfect. And became a professional mountain biker. This one is in the past simple because this is a simple fact. Danny has always enjoyed doing stunts. So here we have, again, present perfect. Not surprisingly, he has had a lot of accidents. In fact, he can't ride at the moment because he has just broken his collarbone for the third time in the past 6 months. Again, information that is relevant to this moment because he is still injured. He is still recovering from the injury to his collarbone that happened 6 months ago. And this is why we use present perfect, because this is something that happened in the past, but the consequences of this act or this event can be felt in the present. Now, here are a few useful definitions and examples of the difference between present perfect and past simple. So for one, we use past simple to talk about completed events in the past, often with words that refer to a specific time. For instance, yesterday, 2 years ago, etc. For instance, I went to London last weekend. And then we have a few uses, as you can see, for present perfect. We have 3 different instances in which we will use present perfect. Firstly, we will use present perfect to say how long a current situation has existed. So we use often for or since. For instance, I have lived in Zagreb since 2005, but I have lived in Zagreb for 7 years. So it's an act that started happening in the past, but it's still happening. And with the present perfect, we are sort of accentuating the longevity of the act itself. We are talking about how long the act has been happening. Then secondly, we use the present perfect to talk about an experience at an unspecified time in the past. For instance, have you ever been to Paris? No, I haven't. So unlike past simple, in which we have specific time references, for instance, yesterday, 2 years ago, etc., here we are just generally talking about an experience in the past. And the focus is more on the experience itself than on when it exactly happened. It's important that you don't confuse this with the first usage of present perfect, because in the first usage of present perfect with for and since, you will have a specific time in the past. Usually it will be a year or a month. So I have lived in Zagreb since 2005, or I have lived in Zagreb for 5 months, stuff like that. So you will have a specific time mentioned, or maybe a specific year, but the focus will still be on how long the process has lasted. It will not be on the specific time that the event started. While in B, in the usage with B, you just have a general question about the past, which is more focused about the act itself. And finally, we use the present perfect to talk about recent events that have a connection with the present. We sometimes use already, just, or yet, but not necessarily always. For instance, you look happy. I have just got my exam result. So here we have just, and of course, this is what we have been talking about. It's an event or an action that took place in the past. It is a finished action, but its consequences are still felt in the present. So the person who got their exam result is still happy about the result. They are still sort of feeling the consequences of getting this result, even though the act of getting the result has been finished. It is still in the past. Now, with all this information in mind, try to solve these two exercises. Solve the left one first. You will need to complete these sentences with either the past simple tense or the present perfect tense. And then over here, you will look at your finished exercise on the left, and you will find these time markers or time references that you will either put in past simple or the present perfect, depending on where you put them in the text. So take as long as you need. Feel free to pause this video and complete the two exercises. Now let's check our results. When did you start kayak surfing? 10 years ago, I went kayaking a few times with my family. Later, my brother took me to the beach and we went kayaking in the waves. I have been a fan since that day. Most people have not heard of kayak surfing. What is it? It's like surfing, but you're in a kayak, not on a board. The sport has become a lot more popular in the past few years. Have you had much success in the sport? Yes, I have won several medals so far, including the Junior World Championship. When did you win that? In 2009. Now let's look at this exercise and what we have here. So, when did you start kayak surfing is a question about the specifics of a past event. We want to know when a certain action happened, so we will use the present simple. Again, 10 years ago, I went kayaking a few times with my family. So this is a finite action. It's not still happening in the present, nor does it have any consequences on the present. And we have a clear marker about when in the past this happened. So we will use the past simple. Again, the same with took. So later, my brother took me to the beach. Also, when we use this later, after that, then, so when we are sort of listing past events one after another, this will always be in the past simple. But here we have, I have been a fan since that day. So we have the marker since, which tells us that we will use the present perfect. Also, this person has started being a fan in the past, but they are still a fan. So this is an action that started in the past, but is still ongoing in the present. And this is why we use the present perfect. Most people have not heard of kayak surfing. Here we use the present perfect because if we used simple here and we say most people didn't hear of kayak surfing, it would imply that we are talking about the past still, that in the past most people didn't hear about kayak surfing. But here we are talking about the present. We are talking about now. People still have not heard. So while in the past they have not heard, in the present they are still unaware. So even though this is a sort of non-action, not hearing something is not really an action, but when we analyze it on the syntactic level, when we analyze it as a verb, it is an action. It's a non-action that didn't happen in the past and is still sort of ongoing, but people are slowly starting to hear about kayak surfing, and this is why we use the present perfect, because it's relevant to the present, but it sort of was happening in the past as well. Now here we have the sport has become a lot more popular in the past few years. The same thing applies as the last one. So it has been gradually becoming popular. Its popularity has been rising. This is an action that started happening in the past, but it is still getting more and more popular, which is why it's important to the present. Have you had much success in the sport? General question. Yes, I have won several medals so far. Again, we have this so far, which tells us clearly that this is present perfect, but we can also logically conclude that this person has won medals, but is still the type of athlete who will probably win more medals. So this is a process that is still ongoing. And here we have a question about a specific time, again, as in the first example, when did you win that? And the answer is in 2009. Now, as you have probably concluded from the text, if these were your answers or close to these, you had probably not a big problem sorting these expressions out. So let's check them too. In past simple, we have yesterday, last week, a year ago, in 2009, later, this is what we were talking about here, and 10 years ago over here. And in the present perfect, we have yet, already, today, and then we have in the past few weeks, we have since, and we have so far over here. So if you are not sure, if you find these expressions in the text, they will help you locate or figure out which you should use where. Moving on to our present perfect continuous. So the present perfect that we were talking about until now has been present perfect simple. And now we will talk about present perfect continuous, just like present simple and present continuous, past simple and past continuous. So each form has a simple form and a continuous form. So as we know, the present perfect simple is formed with using the auxiliary verb have or has plus the past participle of a verb. The present perfect continuous is formed a little bit differently. Our famous ing ending is, of course, present, the continuous ending, the ending always connected to continuous, but we have a little bit more to it. So before we start, analyzing present perfect continuous in more detail, let's read this text about brain workouts. And again, you will focus on the verbs that are written in red. So, Kevin Wilson is not usually a fan of computer games, but recently he has been playing one particular game a lot. In fact, he's been playing it every day for 6 weeks. It's a special kind of game, which is designed to increase brain power by giving the player mental exercises. I'm definitely improving, he says. I've been getting much better scores recently. Wilson is one of 11,000 volunteers who have been taking part in a scientific study organized by a Cambridge scientist called Adrian Owen. Its purpose is to find out if brain training really works. Half of the volunteers haven't been using the brain training programs at all. They've been surfing the internet instead. Owen has conducted several studies of this kind, and they have all shown the same thing. Brain training has a small positive effect on mental abilities, but surfing the internet is just as good. Now, as you might have noticed, all of these are in the present perfect continuous tense. Or in the present perfect continuous form. You can see that we still have our auxiliary verb have or has, so that has not changed in the present perfect continuous. But the difference is we do not have our past participle here, we have our ing form of the verb, the ing form that we use in the present continuous, past continuous as well. And we also have the past participle form of the verb to be. So the present perfect continuous is formed with 3 different verbs. One auxiliary verb, or 2 auxiliary verbs if you count the verb to be, and our ing form verb. So here we have, he has been playing. Again, he has been playing. I have been getting. Who have been taking part. Volunteers haven't been using. They have been surfing. Now let's take this into account and try to fill these blanks in the 2 rectangles. Let's check our answers. So we form the present perfect continuous with have or has plus been, which is the past participle form of the verb to be, plus the ing form of the verb. We use the present perfect continuous to talk about 2 different things. So the first one is an action that began in the past and is still in progress. We often use for or since to say how long it has been in progress. For instance, we have been playing tennis for an hour, or how long have you been waiting? Since midday. So this is very similar to our present perfect simple use, to one of the 3 present perfect simple uses. So an action which happened in the past and is still going on in the present, or it's still relevant in the present. But with the present perfect continuous, we are talking about the action that is literally still taking place. Again, we have for or since, which also happens in the present perfect simple. So a little confusion is possible there, which is why I'm accentuating this. But here we have, for instance, the sentence, we have been playing tennis for an hour. So we started playing an hour ago, but we are still playing. It's still going on. It's not that it's still relevant, it's that it's still going on. It's similar to the difference between the present simple and present continuous, or past simple and past continuous. So you know the old saying that you have been learning since probably 4th or 5th grade, that you use the present simple for habits, for implied things, for things that are everyday things. So for specifying where you work, for instance, I work in a factory, you will use the present simple because this is an everyday thing. This is sort of a habit of yours. It's not something that can be interrupted, and it's not something that is still ongoing, unlike continuous. So the same difference is between the present perfect simple and the present perfect continuous. So while you can say, I have worked in a hospital since 2005, you will need the continuous tense to talk about things that are still happening and that are sort of things that can be interrupted, things that are not just your habits. So working somewhere, you can use the present perfect simple, or lived, for instance. I have lived in this house for 15 years, for instance. But when you are talking about things that can be interrupted, things that are not habits, you will need to use the present perfect continuous. Now the second sentence is very similar as well. So how long have you been waiting? Since midday. So this person started waiting, and they are still waiting. The waiting hasn't stopped yet. And of course, this is not a habit of theirs. This is just something that they are doing today, or that they did today. And secondly, we use the present perfect continuous to talk about an action that has recently stopped and which explains the present situation. For instance, I have been carrying these heavy bags. That's why I'm tired. So even though the action is no longer ongoing, which is usually the requirement for continuous, the direct consequence of an action is still present. So again, very similar to present perfect simple, although in present perfect simple, the action happened a bit more long ago. It did not happen an instant before, while in continuous, it is implied that the action has just only recently stopped. So I have been carrying these heavy bags, that's why I'm tired. These two instances probably occurred on the same day, and this is why we use continuous. Now, with that in mind, try to put these verbs into the present perfect continuous tense. Feel free to pause the video and do it at your own pace. Now let's check. You have been playing that computer game for hours. I feel sick. I have been eating chocolates all day. I'm sure you'll pass your exams. You have been working all term. Who has been drinking my orange juice? My glass is half empty. Luke isn't Lady Gaga's cousin. He has been pulling your leg. The weather is great. We have been wearing shorts every day. Now, before we continue, for those of you who might not be familiar with this term, with this expression, pulling your leg, this is an idiom which means that someone is sort of messing with you, someone is pranking you in a way, joking with you, for instance, telling you that they're Lady Gaga's cousin, but they're really not. So little innocuous pranks, that would be someone pulling your leg, messing with you. Here are some more useful definitions about the difference between present perfect simple and present perfect continuous. So here are a few instances where we use the present perfect simple and not continuous. So number one is if the action is finished and complete. So I have written a letter. I'm going to post it now. So even though it's relevant to this moment that I have written this letter because I am going to post it now, it is still something that affects my life, the action of writing the letter is over. And this is why we are using the present perfect simple. Number two, if we want to say how often an action has happened, for instance, she's broken her legs 3 times. So we have that with our stunt man. So when we try to, again, in the present simple or past simple, we have the same instance. So whenever we have this often present or when we have something that repeats, we will always use simple rather than continuous. Continuous is always less likely to repeat itself. And number three, with state verbs, of course, just as with present simple and past simple. For instance, verbs like love, live, know, etc. For instance, I've known Joe for years, not I have been knowing Joe for years. So this is the same as I have lived in this apartment for 5 years. Now I have one final exercise for you. Here you will need to decide whether you will put the present perfect simple or the present perfect continuous. So this is your sort of final test for the day. Feel free to solve it in your notebooks or however you would like. You can use Word or similar programs as well. And you can also just write down the numbers and the verbs in their correct form. You don't need to copy the entire text, of course. Feel free to pause the video and we will check it together in a few moments. Let's start. Hi, Tom. So, we're halfway through the summer holiday. Have you been enjoying it? Aunt Vera has been staying with us. Dad and Aunt Vera have never liked each other. They haven't had any big arguments yet, but that's probably because Dad has been spending his evenings up in the attic. He says he has been working, but when I went up there, he was making a model airplane. He has made about 10 of them. They're all on his desk. So as you can see, all the actions that are in the present perfect continuous are actions that are still ongoing. So the first one is the enjoyment of the holiday. As it says here, we're halfway through the summer holiday. So the holiday is not over yet. They are still enjoying their holiday. And this is why it will be in the continuous. Have you been enjoying it so far? Aunt Vera has been staying with us. Again, she is still staying. It is an ongoing action and it is not a habit. But here we have Dad and Aunt Vera have never liked each other. So even though they still don't like each other, we have a state verb. So we will use the past perfect simple. They haven't had any big arguments yet. So no arguments have happened yet, and it is not an ongoing action, so it will not be in continuous. But that's probably because Dad has been spending his evenings up in the attic. He is spending them still in the attic, so this is an ongoing action. He says he has been working, again, the same thing. But when I went up there, he was making a model airplane. He has made about 10 of them. This is a finished action. It is over, but it is relevant to what we are talking about, so it will be in the present perfect simple. Thank you for your time and see you next time.